Hi, welcome to another edition of This Issue. My guest this time is Chalmers Hardenbergh, who's the editor of a publication called the Atlantic Northeast Rails and Ports Newsletter. Chalmers, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Good to have you. Tell us about this publication that you edit. What is it all about?
Well, my newsletter covers the railroads and ports in New England and Atlantic Canada, and it's really designed for the trade professional. It's about the business of railroads and the business of ports.
And why did you begin publishing it?
To try to help railroads. I was living in Yarmouth at the time, and I saw a tiny train. I could see one from my house go past, and I thought, railroads need help. And so I designed this newsletter to try to help railroads talk to each other and the ports to the railroads and have it build the idea of a community of transportation.
So the people that subscribe to it are mostly in the industry, the professionals that are working on rail.
Right, including governments, state governments, local governments who are very interested in promoting rail.
Well, you know, with the increase in fuel costs these days, there seems to be more and more interest in rail. And because of climate change, global warming, obviously we're beginning to see the necessity to expand rail. Is there going to be a large impact on climate change because of rail? Can that help solve the problem?
Bruce, I'm very pessimistic about railroads and climate change. I did a little research before coming in here, and I found that the basic problem for global warming is burning coal. And we create about 2.919 billion tons of CO2 every year burning coal. China creates 2.73 billion tons burning coal. And railroads, as you know, burn oil, so we're not going to, even if we put everything we had onto rail, we would change none of the coal burning problem. So no, railroads are not going to solve global warming.
What do they solve?
Well,
why bother?
Well, I see it in two ways. One, it helps our local environment. That is, we're putting out, by using railroads, many fewer tons of pollutant right here locally. But more importantly, we're moving away from burning oil because every rail car, freight rail car, will take the equivalent of 4 trucks. So you automatically reduce the amount of oil you're consuming by 75% right away.
So every rail car is the equivalent of 4 trucks on the highway.
Right.
Okay.
And add to that, we've got congestion. I mean, I don't like to drive past heavy trucks moving on the highway. The damage to highways done by trucks is geometrically greater than the damage to a car. So every truck does something like 1,000 times as much damage as a car does. So if we can get the damage to our highways away, then we as a state are going to be saving money, a lot of money.
And the price of repaving roads is going up because asphalt is a oil-based product, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, local towns are saying they can't afford to fix streets right now.
You're talking about increasing the hauling of freight. Primarily, that's what your newsletter is
Exactly.
about. Won't putting more products on freight, isn't that going to get rid of a lot of trucks? The trucking business, truck drivers, aren't they going to lose their jobs?
No. No is the simple answer, and there are several reasons for that. But one reason is that truckers don't want to drive the distances that rail hauls happen. For example, a ton of paper coming out of, say, the mill in Skowhegan is going to go to Chicago or maybe even to California. A trucker, like all of us, wants to be home in bed every night, so he'd much rather see that ton of paper go on a rail car and move to California. The advantage to him is that he can still have a job because usually someone's got to move that paper from wherever it arrives in California to the ultimate printing plant. Most printing plants these days don't have their own rail sidings. So the trucker in California is going to have a job. And similarly, all the stuff that comes into Maine, truckers are going to have jobs moving that from wherever it lands to a mill or another place.
So is the expansion of freight lines in Maine, for example, going to help the expansion of passenger rail? Is there a link between these two concepts?
Well, very much so. Let me just point out on the map here. We, as all of your listeners know, I'm sure, we now have passenger rail from Boston to Portland on the Downeaster. Amtrak now runs from Boston to Portland. Now, because the railroad has run, the state has paid for a huge increase in the quality of that rail, the freight that moves between Boston and Portland on this black line shown here can run faster, and the freight railroad that handles it doesn't have to pay the entire cost of keeping that rail line up. The Amtrak will pay for, let's say, roughly half of the cost of keeping the rail line up. So it's a real boon to freight railroads.
So the increase in passenger service helps, in a way, subsidize the hauling of freight.
Right.
And it helps. So it's a good marriage between the two.
Very much so.
Talk a minute, if you would, about the history of Maine and rail. At one time, we know that there was, before the car was big, there was a strong trolley system throughout the state. You really had a connection between most of the communities in Maine, not only for freight, but also for passenger rail. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I have a wonderful anecdote when I went to hear a talk on the history of railroads in Yarmouth, where I live, and a guy came up to me afterwards and he says, you know, I can remember people bringing sardines in boxes from the harbor in Yarmouth up to the train station and loading them into cars on the rail to go, you know, wherever, out somewhere to the United States. So the freight happened. The passenger happened too. I mean, we had trolleys from, again, in Yarmouth, we had a trolley that came from Portland to Yarmouth and went on to Brunswick from there. So it was good. But
it was the whole state connected also with passenger service?
Yes. In fact, with both regular passenger service, or what one would call heavy rail, and also the trolleys or light rail, you could go on a trolley all the way to Lewiston to Bangor, if you didn't mind spending all day. And there's, of course, the problem. If you didn't mind spending all day on the trolley, you could get very far on it.
Yeah. Well, when you go to other countries, particularly, for example, Europe, you have that ability to go to any major city and then take a train to really virtually any place. As gasoline increases in price in this country to $5 and $6 and $7 a gallon, I just came back from a trip to Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and while I was there, they were paying $8 a gallon, equivalent U.S. price.
Right.
Well, imagine how $8 a gallon is going to feel in Maine. People are going to be clamoring for rail. And so what's holding it up today? Why are we not today moving forward with expansion of passenger rail and even freight rail in a way? What's holding it back today?
Well, let's address the passenger rail problem first, because that is a question of public participation. And you're right, when gasoline, which is now below $3 a gallon, when gasoline was edging towards $5, people flocked to mass transit. The Downeaster just this past quarter had a record number of passengers on the train. There are two problems, immediate problems for public transportation for passengers. One is it starts to cost more for the railroads. the trolley lines, the buses, they all have to pay more because their price of gasoline or diesel goes up too. And secondly, they don't now have the capacity. I mean, the Downeaster some of its trains are filled every day. They can't expand because they're going to need more equipment and they're going to need more space capacity on the tracks. And the third problem is, of course, public funding. I mean, as we all know, Maine is having a hard time meeting its current obligations. And the question is, as I'm sure you can answer this, where are we going to get the rest of the money to start expanding passenger rail?
Well, that is a good question. And so let's talk about that for a minute.
Okay.
Everyone's against tax increases, of course. People say, well, we can't do that to expand rail. So where will the money come from? As gasoline inevitably, my personal opinion is the reason why the gas prices have dropped in recent weeks is because it's right before the election. It's a great way to demobilize people's anger about the economy is drop the prices in gas. My prediction, as soon as the election's over, we'll see the prices go up again. But
well, all right, my answer is a little bit different on that, Bruce. I agree that even before the current financial crisis, the price of gasoline was going down, and you could say that that was due to some manipulation. But right now, the price of gasoline has gone down because of the financial crisis, and that to me is also an opportunity for passenger rail right now. That is, the Congress and even President Bush today is talking about spending more money, giving more money out into the economy. Another stimulus, thank you. Another stimulus. And I don't think this stimulus should be another $600 or whatever I got in my wallet. Another stimulus just out to the taxpayers. It should be into what I like to call the new infrastructure and into the existing infrastructure. I mean, some of it should go to fix our existing roads, and some of it should be going to build more capacity in rail. Not airlines, but in rail, so we can move people more efficiently.
Airlines are saturated right now, right? The airports are sort of over capacity.
And they're cutting back flights.
So it makes sense that we develop this other alternative. The roads are saturated, the airlines are saturated. Let's develop rail. One of the things that I've been saying for years is we have to stop spending so much on the military. We're now spending, when you add it all up, all the various little components where they hide the money here, they hide it there, we're spending $1 trillion a year on the Pentagon. Well, why can't we take a significant chunk of that money, begin to expand these new technologies, not only rail, but wind power and solar? Because let's face it, we're 5% of the world's population. We use 25% of the world's resources. And the reason why we've built this military empire to a large extent is so that we can control these resources. We can extract the oil from here and from there. So if we begin to change our energy policy, if we begin to fund these new technologies and lessen our dependence on this foreign oil, then we don't need such a huge military. So they're absolutely linked, aren't they?
I guess I always quote this phrase, to a man with a hammer, the entire world looks like a nail. And to me, the entire world looks like rail. So when you're talking about new alternative sources of energy, I begin to think of rail. And one of the steps that we could take is to electrify some of our system. That would not only get us away from consumption of oil, which, as you point out, we tend to try to defend all over the world, our sources of oil, but it would begin to promote the uses of alternative energy to drive the locomotives, to drive the trains. And you were just in Europe, and you'll see how many of the passenger rail systems are electrified there. Here in the United States, we have one electrified system, and that's from Boston to Washington. we could expand that electrification. Again, a great place to put some of the money is to not only invest it in the railroads, but invest in alternative ways of developing, creating electricity, such as the ones you mentioned, wind power, tidal, solar.
And all of this means one thing, jobs. Because every one of these things that you just talked about doing, that means we create new jobs, jobs that can't be exported. Who's going to build them? When we expand rail and we need new rail cars, who's going to build them? I mean, at a place like Bath Iron Works, could we not build some of these technologies, rail and wind turbines? Is that possible?
Well, certainly it is, because Bath builds ships, and they have, inside the ships, they have engines, and they're built out of steel. They have a high use of electronics. All those capabilities are needed to build rail cars and rail locomotives. So I would, and it's served by rail. The rail line goes right past Bath Iron Works right now. I think it would be the ideal place to start to put some of our funds.
And so it's really just a matter of, when you think about it, building warships, those are American tax dollars being used to do that.
Right.
And so it's really just a matter of demand of the public to say we want our tax dollars to be used for rail or wind turbine construction rather than building warships for endless war. So it's our money anyway. And the studies show that when you make that transition, that conversion, you actually get more jobs out of it.
Yeah, just as we're going to get a lot more jobs if we don't give everybody $600 in a tax refund, but we put it into infrastructure.
Let's talk briefly for a moment about peak oil, because I've done one show a couple of years ago about peak oil, and it's really going to drive a lot of this necessity. But could you explain what peak oil really is and what is likely to happen as we hit peak oil?
Well, peak oil means that we've hit the peak in terms of the amount of oil that we can extract from the ground. And in the United States, that's already happened, and everybody acknowledges it. That's why, as you point out, we're more and more dependent upon foreign oil. If you think of a bell curve, we've already been up at the top in terms of United States oil production, and we're heading down. Now, in other areas of the world, the same thing is happening, that is, we're getting close to their peak amount of oil that they're going to be able to draw out. Even Russia, China, the Middle East, it's going to start heading down.
So the availability of oil is declining, but at the same time, global demand for oil is increasing.
Exactly.
That's why the price will continue to rise, inevitably. Correct?
And until we start until two things happen. One is we decrease the demand, and that could happen if we have a very slow economy. And I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing the price of oil drop now, is that the economy is slowing, the demand is slowing. And the other thing is until there's an adequate substitute. And that may, if suddenly we have a better way of producing energy than oil, then that maybe nobody will want oil. So it'll just go begging.
Today our society is largely based on oil, right?
Completely based on oil.
Food production is largely oil-based.
Right.
The roads are asphalt oil-based. The cars are oil-based. I mean, our whole society is structured around oil, right?
Don't forget plastics. Everything I buy in the grocery store is now contained in plastics, and that all comes from oil.
So what does life look like then as we hit peak oil, and let's say we don't really make these changes that we're talking about are so needed? What does life begin to look like at that time as the availability declines and the price goes up? What happens?
Well, here's where I feel a little sad, Bruce, because the price of transportation is going to rise. Again, I'm focusing on this and rail, and it already was happening that the price of transportation had jumped. For example, the price to move a container of, let's say, Sony televisions from Japan to the United States went from $1,000 to $5,000 roughly. So suddenly people are going to say, well, geez, that's too much money. I can't afford to buy a TV anymore from Japan. But more importantly, the price of food grown in, say, California and moving all the way to Maine is also going to it, and it is increasing in our grocery stores. What we need to do then is, as I say, unfortunately, from my point of view, is stop thinking about transporting food these long distances and start growing it locally.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the current plans now in the state of Maine? Let's just take Maine, for example. Within the government, within industry, what are the current plans to expand rail in the state? What's on the agenda at this very moment?
Well, let's go back to the map here again, Bruce. As I said, right now we have the Amtrak, the Downeaster runs up to Portland. Current plans, active plans, are to have Amtrak extend the line from Portland to Brunswick. As I say, that's plans. Because of the budget deficit, people are saying, well, maybe we're not going to be able to do that. In terms of freight rail, unfortunately, the attitude is not expand, but just barely keep what's happening now alive. Because freight rail depends so much on paper mills, and this map shows the paper mills, Lincoln Paper and Tissue. Red Shield's now bankrupt. Verso's cut back one of its paper machines here. Sappi, Madison Paper, New Page, again Verso. Wausau Paper's come back on some of its machines. I believe that the big effort here is going to be to keep our paper mills in operation, and the freight rail that's going to bring in both the chemicals there and take the paper out is going to have to continue, but it's going to be barely continuing because the amount of traffic is dropping, unfortunately.
And so it's possible then that the need for freight in Maine will diminish because of the difficulties of keeping the paper mills in operation, which again comes back to energy, doesn't it?
Right. But that's before we really begin to hit peak oil, and at that point, people are going to be saying. But again, as I say, people are not now saying how are we going to expand capacity. But when the price of transportation goes back up, as you say it inevitably will, then people are going to say, oh, okay, how are we going to help rail move more stuff, move more people?
And is the state today thinking ahead 20, 30 years, looking at peak oil, looking at the inevitability of fuel prices rising, looking at the inevitability that we're going to need rail because people won't be able to afford to get to work in their cars? Is the state today planning and preparing for that reality that is coming very soon? Are they doing it?
That's a very good question, Bruce. And my immediate response is no. And then I hear Greg Netto, the Deputy Commissioner of Transportation, saying, Chop, no, that's wrong. We are thinking about it. And I think he's right. He is thinking about it. He's made public statements about it. The governor has talked about trying to concentrate more on rail. But actually saying, look, we're going to be facing $10 a gallon gasoline. People are not going to be able to move. I don't think we've really faced that in terms of rail. I think former Governor Angus King has faced that in terms of energy.
Talking about wind power.
Wind power. And we're certainly putting up terrestrial wind power now, and Angus is talking about putting it offshore. So people are thinking about it, but is the state saying this is coming and it's going to happen and here's what we're going to have to do? No, I think it's too scary.
What's going to happen if they continue to essentially think about it but not plan and not really proactively move in this direction? What's going to happen in Maine when we hit that wall? Are we going to just shut down?
Well, it's not going to be a one-time event. It's going to be a slow decline in in our standard of living, in our ability to move around. And I'm a pessimist here. I think that is what's going to happen, and I don't see any way around it at this point.
The people need to be thinking about this, talking about this more, beginning to make demands on the politicians.
They have to make demands on themselves, Bruce. That's my problem. They have to say, you're right, I can see I'm not going to be able to drive to Augusta from my home in Portland every day to work. I'm going to have to start taking the train. I'm going to commit myself to taking the train, even though it's going to be less
And is
convenient.
there a train from Portland to Augusta today? No.
No, there
That's
isn't.
my point.
Right.
It's nice to say to the people that, okay, I'm going to take the train from Portland to Augusta, but there is no train from
Right.
Portland to Augusta. And what I'm saying is the people need to realize, yes, you're right about that. They need to realize that they must take the train from Portland to Augusta, but they must move into political action today to begin to demand of the politicians that we stop building weapons for endless war and build trains from Portland to Augusta and beyond so that we can get to work. And you know what? Tourists are not going to come to Maine either if they can't have a public transportation system when they get here, when they get off at the airport in Portland. If they can't have a rail system to distribute them out around the state, they're not going to come here anymore.
Exactly, and that's our leading industry, tourism, and we are going to get hit by that.
Well, needless to say, we're in big trouble.
Right.
And you are right here on this show predicting it, and thank you very much for that. We expect and will demand that our listeners begin to speak up more about this. And I know there's some politicians that tune into this show from time to time, and it would be nice if they would begin to start talking about some of this a little more often as well, and also begin talking about this conversion process, because that's where the money is, let's be honest. The money is in the honeypot, as someone told me the other day, is the military-industrial complex. Well, Chalmers, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for inviting me, Bruce.
Really appreciate it. And thank you for watching another edition of This Issue. Until next time, good luck to you all, and please get organized.